It hasn't sold out yet, but we have sold at least one seat for the upcoming conference. So this little form tells you about 2024 TLC. You may or may not know this, but our organization has an award called the Don Deschler Leadership Award that we give to someone every year, and I've written my notes, so I apologize for reading from notes, but it's usually somebody who matters a lot, and that's the case today, and so I just find I need notes, otherwise I might get too emotional about it. So the Don Deschler Leadership Award has been created to honor people who have had a significant, profound impact on the work of the Instructional Coaching Group. Don was director of the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning for more than 3 decades. He was my co-doctoral advisor, and then he guided me for more than 20 years as I worked on multiple research projects at KU. He's a co-developer of what's called the Strategic Instruction Model, which has helped tens of thousands of children learn how to learn. Don's work has made the world a better place for children, especially those who are at risk for being left behind. And as influential as Don was on me and hundreds of researchers, Don's impact is greater on my personal life. His kindness, his compassion, his purpose and hard work change who I am as a person. As grateful as I am to what I learned about how to be a researcher, I'm more grateful for all he showed me about how to be a decent human being. This year's award winner is Zaretta Hammond. Zaretta has left an unmistakably positive impact on the Instructional Coaching Group and on me, and here are just a few of her accomplishments. You're probably most proud of the first one, which is that Zaretta was a high school and community college expository writer instructor, and she's the author of Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, promoting authentic engagement and rigor for culturally linguistic and diverse students. Her life's passion is what she refers to as the intersectionality of equity, literacy, and culturally responsive teaching. She works with school teams to design engaging, hands-on professional learning experiences, as well as deliver fun, informative professional development. And she's created online learning opportunities. Her online work is massive in what you've accomplished, the large groups of people who've come through and learned so much based on our conversations. It's really been wonderful how these communities have evolved. From my perspective, I think her real contribution is she's gotten educators everywhere talking about culturally responsive teaching and equity. Because of her book and her professional development, educators are now seeing and doing things that they weren't seeing and doing before. And those changes in schools are bringing hope to educators and, most importantly, students. I talked to Zaretta's editor, Dan Alpert, he's also one of my editors, and I asked him about Zaretta, and he told me that although Zaretta is incredibly successful, personal success is the least of her concerns. She is, he told me, incredibly mission-driven and, as you're going to see, a force of nature. We give the Don Deschler Leadership Award to people who have so profoundly affected our thinking that we wouldn't be who we are if it wasn't for them. And Zaretta has had that kind of impact on me. Her podcasts with me on coaching conversations are our most popular podcasts. And I think it's in part because Zaretta sees the importance and power of coaching. And in my conversations with Zaretta, she doesn't flinch from speaking truth. And on more than one occasion, she's educated me in public. If you listen to the podcast, you'll hear me learning. And she's not afraid to say what has to be said, especially when we're talking about what's best for all children. But Zaretta speaks truth with grace and with love. Her only concern is what's best for kids. She inspires me, she pushes me, she makes me feel uncomfortable, which means she teaches me. And when I'm able to really listen and apply what she teaches me, she makes me a better person. So please welcome this year's winner of the Don Deschler Leadership Award.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you. I got a little plaque. Thank you. I appreciate you so much, Jim. Thank you for those words. And I get to take that home and put it on a wall. I just moved to a new place, so I get a lot of blank walls to fill up. And I don't know what to say about that other than, thank you. But the reality is I consider myself a boots on the ground teacher. And it takes a village. Nobody can do this by themselves. This is not about, I've got some profound knowledge that only I can deliver. So we all have to level our game up. So that's really what, I want to do. And so that's what I want to do today in my keynote, is really start to think about coaches as kind of the leaders, or what I consider the linchpin, right? Instructional coaches are the linchpin, and that's where we'll start. So I don't know if you can see, there we go. And we all are leading for equity, and the question is, where are we leading from? Can you put the time up there? Because y'all, I will keep talking till the cows come home, and I see 0, 0. I'm like, somebody's going to be missing their breakout sessions. There we go. Thank you very much. All right, so I just want to start with a question. I'm going to put a couple of names up here, and the question is, what do these people have in common? Who are these folks? Do you recognize that name? Where are my history teachers at? All right. Those last two are giveaways. Like, oh, okay. These were guides. The first one was an indigenous Sherpa that led explorers to the top of Everest, folks that guided people across the Oregon Trail, the North Pole, South Pole, across the Pacific Northwest, into what we then call the Far East. Folks would not have made places that we think are everyday and common without someone to be that guide. So in many ways, for those expeditions, they were the linchpin. They were the piece that held it together. They knew enough about the lay of the land to help people move through. They also knew enough about the hardships to say, this is how we overcome those hardships. They also had done it enough times to help people hold it together emotionally and stay in community socially. And I think the reality is, as coaches, you are no different. And what is a linchpin? It's actually this little metal piece. It's got a round ring at the top, but it's the long piece that you stick into a wheel when you're putting it on the hub of a cart or a wagon. The way we commonly use it in colloquial terms is it is the person who helps hold various elements of a complex enterprise together. And that's what I believe instructional coaches do. It's not all on you to do, but you play an important role in every part of moving us toward more equitable outcomes. The buzzwords these days are deep learning, acceleration, higher order thinking, and everybody's just saying words. You know what I'm talking about. But is anybody actually doing it? For folks that know me, one of my mantras is, information is not transformation. Just because you can say the word don't mean you can do it. But coaches help us learn how to do it, how to level our skills up. Because if we're really talking about making these things real for the most underserved students are vulnerable, dependent learners, historically marginalized students, then we're going to have to think about how we approach rigor. And that means, again, not just repeating the words, but to understand what rigor is. Instruction and content gets increasingly more complex, but it also means that the student is able to autonomously, to be cognitively independent in carrying the cognitive load and to process that information, even as it increases in complexity. That's what we mean by rigor, not just throw the baby in the deep end of the water, high expectations, we're going to over-scaffold to give them access, and all the shenanigans we're up to in classrooms. Because the data is telling us it's still shenanigans. Those babies still aren't reading, same groups at the bottom, same groups at the top when you look at your data. So we have to actually think about what's at the source. And here's the thing we need to understand. What we are up against is inequity by design. Historically, public schools started with the intent to sort students by class, by language, by race. And it wasn't just we're going to sort them, but then we have a mechanism to make sure that that sorting is self-perpetuating. Underdevelop the cognitive capacities of the student, and as a consequence, undermine their confidence as learners, as intellectuals. So part of our task is to restore that to them, not just to rage against the machine. Yes, we can keep talking about implicit bias and racism, and what we're going to do about it. And part of that work is helping students regain what they have been denied. But too often what we have is a pedagogy of compliance. For too many students, indigenous students, black, brown, poor, and it looks like this: orderliness and quiet are valued over the messiness and loudness of productive struggle. Students talking is highly monitored and minimized. You know, we tell students to do I swore I wasn't going to cuss today, so I'm going to try not to. To do a week turn and talk. See, there would have been an expletive right there. Right? The turn and talk is, you say something to your partner says something to you, and then you come back to the teacher. That's it. She's going to give you the cue, then you're going to come back. Talking is minimized. Focus on completion over learning. Right? Mistakes aren't explained, let alone tolerated. That's why we're still using the red pen. And just because you switch to purple don't make it any better. Right? Participation from the student's vantage point is just strategic. Is this going to be on the test, teacher? Because if it's not, I'm going to stop paying attention right about now. And students can pass a class, get an A and get a B because they've accumulated enough points, not because they've demonstrated they've learned anything. Extra credit. Can I do extra credit? You get points because you paid attention. So now we have to re-examine our grading policies. Let's not even add the price of nice, right? Some of you live in states, Canadians, we know this happens too. Adults are not skilled in noticing and naming the things that are going wrong, microaggressions that might be happening, ways students are not getting rigorous instruction. I truly encourage you all to read this book, The Price of Nice, because we see things in front of us and we don't know what to say. We don't know how to shift it. This should be part of what a coach is able to do. No one's saying you need to roll up on people. That is contrary to partnership. But the fact is you need to learn to say it with love and grace in terms of being able to help people who want to do better, do better. But here's the truth about it. Historically, deep learning experiences have been rationed for certain groups of kids. And it's still happening. We talk about, oh, we've eliminated tracking, but in many ways, we're not preparing students. We're not getting students ready for rigor. Consequently, we can open up our AP courses or detrack our honors classes, but we've not prepared students to be powerful readers or have the stamina to write a full essay. And by self-protection, they move themselves out of those environments. But we've set them up for that. Joel Rose wrote a really moving white paper. It's called The Iceberg Problem. And it's one that, as coaches, we need to understand, and particularly in light of the science of learning, that just because we cover our content doesn't mean that students learn it. And learning gaps turn into opportunity gaps. Opportunity gaps turn into achievement gaps. We cannot close achievement gaps until we address the learning gaps. And what he says is they're just cumulative over time. You add the price of nice, the pedagogy of compliance, and this is what happens. By the time students reach 9th grade, we see it. And in many ways, in many circumstances, 9th grade, 10th grade is too late. Students have internalized this. I'm not smart. You know, kids that look like me don't do that. And we can have all the STEM and STEAM programs we want. If you are not preparing students to carry that cognitive load, learn how to learn, improve their information processing skills, you are not working towards social justice. So the essential question I want to bring up today is, as coaches, how do we support a change process that interrupts these reproductive instructional practices so students can actually build the necessary skills to grow their brain power? There's a lot in that. There's a change process. What needs interrupting? What are these instructional practices? How do students grow their brain power? This is the body of work that we need as coaches to add to the frameworks like the impact cycle, like the partnership framework. Those build our capacity as coaches, but we need to know what we are coaching toward. It becomes really important for us to do that. And one of the ways I like to think about that is by layering over this process of change, Joseph Campbell's monomyth, right? The hero's journey. So if we're striving to be culturally responsive educators, we cannot do that until we can prove we can move students from dependent learning to cognitively independent learning. Right? And what it means is we start with, there's a wake-up call to joy and justice, right? We want kids to have joy. Joy is readers, the love of learning, but you cannot do that if you don't feel competent. Competence precedes confidence. So all the growth mindset talk, all the SEL work in the world, if the student knows I cannot read, is not going to feel competent. So our first wake-up call is to understand that we have to help students develop the capacity to learn at higher levels. Then they cross the threshold, right? Anybody who's seen a Star Wars movie understands the hero's journey, right? They just use it in every movie in the world. But at some point, you have to go into the underworld. You're going to leave the known world, and you're going to go into this unknown world. So just like those guides whose names I shared at the beginning of this talk, you are going to have to guide people into some unknown territory and ultimately lead them to, I'm going to go back, lead them to the learning pit at the very bottom, because adults need to be in a learning pit in order to grow. Where's their opportunity for productive struggle? Where's their opportunity to grapple? But we don't need it in a way that just produces more stress. This is the power of a PLC. If we have a high-functioning PLC, not a PLC light, you know what I'm talking about. We're looking at data like it's a magic 8-ball. Let's just keep looking at those numbers, right? Now, let's call it street data now. That's cool. I love street data, but again, it is a process to help you get into the learning pit. So this is how change happens. And this is a graphic I use with folks and teams that I'm working with. They have to understand what's current reality. Before you start doing new stuff, if you don't know what you're currently doing, the plumber doesn't just come to your house and start changing out pipes and then give you a big bill. He assesses current reality. Where's that leak coming from? Right? So it starts with conscious incompetence. We're just whistling along. Oh yeah, I have high expectations. Babies ain't reading. We're doing all the things, really though. But there's a wake-up call that comes. And it can come in a variety of forms in which you see, oh snap, that is not happening. We still have that data, or oh, that we are doing harm to those children when we do this thing. But from unconscious incompetence, you have to now move into conscious competence. I am not very good at that. But now for adults, there comes all this emotion. How are you holding the space for the emotions that come up when we realize that? As leaders, how are you making space for this to happen? It's only in this space when we're trying things on, we're using the power of inquiry, we're using the power of video, because stuff is popping off fast in classrooms. You have to know how to capture it so you can go to this other space with your coach and look at what is going on. And then you're trying new things. This is prototyping and iterating. But you're trying them not on kids as if they are guinea pigs. You're trying them with kids because they are partners in this work. And only then are you going to move toward conscious competence. And then that's going to be fragile. This is what we are trying to do when we are moving the work forward. Our job is to help teachers develop an equity lens toward instruction. How is this building my capacity to expand my students' cognitive development? Does this reinforce a pedagogy of compliance? Is this helping me increase my instructional decision making? Does this spark joy in productive struggle or ignite intellectual curiosity? These are the things we're asking in addition to what's the new strategy or what's the new initiative that we are leading. Because again, what we're trying to do is build the student's capacity. I talk about this as a portrait of a good information processor. And there are 6 elements to that. Student knows how to manage their information processing systems, nurtures their dispositions in order to self-motivate and direct their cognitive behaviors, develops a set of flexible internal cognitive structures that turn inert information into usable knowledge. They can navigate the social context of the classroom to assess their own intellectual safety and regulate their focus. They use internal and external feedback loops to monitor and adjust learning. They name and regulate the emotions of cognition. Because too often we're trying to set up morning meetings where we do our SEL block and then we move on into the hard stuff. What the research is really clear, emotions come up next to cognition. Are you able to coach those? Can you coach the teacher to coach the student to regulate them? That's a whole body of knowledge. This is what we're trying to get the student to become when we talk about getting ready for rigor. There are 3 things I think the coach must support to create these more equitable outcomes. The first, focus on actions over activities. We focus more on standards and learning objectives than students, right? Again, we just start saying these words and we think we're having a very high-level educational conversation. A lot of times I look at people's stuff and I'm like, but where's the student in this? Because we're regulating what adults are going to do. We want coaches to traffic in strategies and get students through the lesson rather than really help them become powerful learners. So a lot of times to kind of get into a classroom, we come bearing strategies because the teacher wants something actionable. How do we help them actually want the thing that they may not want? You know, I raised 2 kids. They want donuts for dinner. I'm like, no, you don't get that. And not because I wanted to be mean, but because I had to help them understand this is how we build a strong body and mind. How do we help teachers see the student as the primary unit of change? Because here's the truth, only the learner learns. All the things we do as coaches, all the things teachers do, if the teacher cannot get the student to be meta-strategic, not just metacognitive. If I'm metacognitive and I have low-level thinking, guess what I'm thinking about? Yeah, my low-level thinking. There's some magical thing that we believe metacognition is going to help you actually carry more of the cognitive load. Like, just keep thinking about that. That is some Harry Potter, Wizarding World, magical thinking. But this is what we do. We don't get students into the learning pit. We don't offer grappling. We have to become the personal trainers of students' cognition. And what does that mean? You know personal trainers. You are going to the wedding, to the Caribbean vacation, you want to get in the swimsuit or the cute dress or skinny suit, and you go write that fat check to the personal trainer. Like, get me ready in 8 weeks. All right, now, you asked for that. It's come in and we're going to do an assessment. Like, do 5 push-ups for me. You do 2 and roll over and ask for a bucket. Now, they're not going to jump down there and do the other 3 for you. You need some water? You need some time? I can wait. But this is what we do. We jump in too quickly. The teacher jumps in. We are over-scaffolding to get students through the lesson. We are not that personal trainer that shows you the moves, who corrects your form, who encourages you to build stamina. We have to do that for teachers so teachers can do that for students. We have to help prepare the dojo. Think of the instructional core as a dojo, right? And I use that metaphor purposefully because the dojo, when you think of martial arts, right, we got padding because somebody's going to be on the floor rolling around, you know, throwing folk. Stuff is going to be happening. Nobody's just going to be sitting watching videos of folks doing, you know, martial arts. You have to actually actively get in there. So this is Dr. Richard Elmore's work where he says the student, the teacher, and the content are always in a dynamic dance. So as coaches, we can coach any one of those areas. Getting students to be a community of learners. Making sure the teacher's a cognitive mediator and can turn the content in ways that create cognitive hooks to the student's body of knowledge. That's what creates relevance, right? Creating the structures for productive struggle. How does that look? What does that look like? So the teachers should be thinking about how is time organized? Here's the thing I want to say about this. These are all first-tier, equity-focused efforts. Too often, what we think are equity-focused efforts is we're talking about bias, how bias shows up in the classroom. We're talking about racial politics, or talking to the students about race. But we don't change anything instructionally in the classroom. Time has to be thought of as an equity issue. Because if you don't have talk structures in place and you're doing that weak turn and talk, yes, I did pause there because I was going to say it again, then we know no real information processing prowess is going to develop. How about a culture of errors? How do students learn to leverage mistakes as information? Not because you just said that from the front of the room, but because there is a structure and a container in the classroom for that to happen. And what do the feedback loops look like? Are they operating? Does the teacher have them in place? Any one of these things can take 4 to 6 weeks to put in place. Are we conferencing with students so teachers can have an instructional conversation to talk about their learning moves? This is not an IEP contract meeting. This is not a meeting where you're going to talk to a student. This is where we together, teacher and student, are talking. This is a primary place to videotape. Then you can start to see, what do I say to get the student to be meta-strategic? I've taught you 5 strategies. Here's a task. Which 2? Let's talk through which 2 you think would be best to tackle this task. How are students coming together as a community of learners? And what does that even mean or look like? And it can't just be the students who are already, acclimated to doing school. How do you get other students into the life of the classroom? But one of the most important things I think we can help teachers do is normalize mistakes. And that this isn't lowering expectations. Focusing on the process of understanding is key. Right? Errors are just information. You got to remember the theory of the first pancake. Y'all all know the theory of the first pancake, right? That first pancake is just funky. It's burnt on one side, it's gooey on the other side. Throw it out. The baby, the dog, the garbage, somebody gonna get that one. But nobody shuts the kitchen down. And school do this all day. Oh, we tried that. That didn't work. You tried it for like 2 minutes. Right? Same thing with kids. Oh, I tried that. That didn't work, so I'm just stuck. This is what dependent learners do. They just sit there. But when we have a culture of errors, we say, hey, what's the information? Where did I understand it? Where did understanding drop off? We iterate. We prototype. This is the heart of design thinking. And when we create that culture, social, emotionally, what happens is anxiety is reduced. We stop focusing on right and wrong, and we start focusing on understanding. You cannot have a rigorous classroom without having a culture of errors. A culture of errors is incompatible with the pedagogy of compliance. That's a whole lot to try and help people interrupt. How is that happening? Where are students getting the practice to go back? And this is not just competency-based mastery. Oh, you just get to do it again and again. Sometimes in life we don't. So you better learn quickly kind of what mistake am I making that I can eliminate. Because there are going to be other spaces where you need to learn fast, fail forward, and learn from that process. And here's what we do instead. We over-scaffold. This is the thing I see most teachers doing. And it is the thing I see coaches not really understand how to help teachers stop doing. So the scaffolding is like the scaffolding of a painter. Right? The painter can get to that second window through the scaffolding, but it's only temporary access. When that scaffolding comes down, can't get back up there. This is what happens with lessons where the teacher's over scaffolding the students through the lesson. The student can't do it on their own. And so the teacher's afraid to take the scaffolds away. Well, they're going to struggle. Yes, they are, because you've given them no other skills. So we have to be mindful of leaning into DeFore's third question. Right? Richard DeFore, kind of the godfather of the PLC, talked about 4 questions. Sometimes there are 6, but there are 4 in my book. Right? What do we want students to know and be able to do is the first one. Second, how will we know when they've learned it? And the third, what will we do when they don't learn it? But I like to reframe that. In the moment, when you are with the student, what will you do when the student is confused or stuck? Right? This is what we call instructional decision making. This is the teacher's ability to see the student is confused and know what to say and do, not to give the student the answer, but to help the student do that internal productive struggle. This is what I mean when I say in culturally responsive teaching of the brain, creating cognitive routines in the head. These are the mental operations that the student says, I am confused. What's my next step? Now, they don't have a teacher in their pocket as they're moving through high school, into the job market, or into college, so you have to help them actually develop those. What will you do in the moment? It's like someone choking. You don't have time when you notice they're choking. Well, some people don't even notice. It's like, oh, is your collar tight? No. I'm about to lose my life up here. Stop. Help. You don't have time to say, I'm going to go watch a YouTube video, and you just hold on. I'm going to get back to you. Instructional decision making, back in the day when I was a baby teacher, that's what we cut our teeth on. What will you do in the moment? What will you say? How have you taught the student to utilize their cognitive routines? What are you activating so they remember? Those are the micro movements in those discretionary moments. How will you do it? How are you investing time in the deliberate practice that teachers need? This is why videotape is so powerful. You can step back and go back to that moment without teachers in the moment having to stop, because everything is in flux. So rather than the temporary scaffold that becomes a crutch when you leave it in too long, because the student will never develop the cognitive capacity that only comes through productive struggle and grappling. Instead, you have to create those permanent structures. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area at a time when we did not have our BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit System, that went through the bay from San Francisco to the East Bay. We had to go across the Bay Bridge. And I remember the conversations, when I was, maybe in middle school or something thereabouts. And they started talking about, oh yeah, we're going to put a subway and have it go under the bay, under the water. I'm like, okay, y'all over there smoking crack in City Hall. That's not going to happen. And they started. Displace some water, throw a scaffold up, displace some dirt, put an iron cast concrete scaffold in there, displace some more water. And they repeated and repeated and repeated. And by the time they took those cast iron scaffolds, they poured concrete, they laid tube down. And sure enough, there was a train that went under the bay. Now, I was not among the first to be riding that. I'll let some other folk test it out, see if you get to the other side. And to date, it's still holding. But the reality is that's what we want. Same thing happens when we're boring a hole in the side of a mountain for a train. Yes, they have to put up a scaffold. Yes, they have to make sure it's secure. But when they take all that down, there's a new pathway. That's what we're doing for teachers. What are the new neural pathways you're helping teachers cultivate so that they can help cultivate the new neural pathways for students? That is the only path to equity, helping students reclaim their cognitive capacity. That was the primary instrument of white supremacy culture wanting to maintain itself. If you're not doing that, I don't know what you're doing. Because just having high expectations is not the same as being the personal trainer of students' cognitive development that allow the learner to be the leader of their own intellectual capacity, to know how to grow it, to learn something new. Knowledge is going to turn over every 3 to 5 years, if not sooner. Learning to learn is the new superpower. Not getting through the lesson, not getting an A. I had to tell my daughter, who's a grown person with her own lease, thank the Lord. You know, she was worried when she was graduating from high school, like, oh, you know, my grades. I said, sweetheart, trust me. In less than 5 years, no one is ever going to ask you about your grades again. But you know what they will want to know? Can you work with a team? Can you create new things? Can you do creative thinking? Can you manage your emotions? There's so many performative skill sets we need to have. That's what we need to focus on, not standardized tests. But right now, instruction is geared toward the test. That tells us nothing. Here's our challenge. You know these things. That won't work for us. We tried that. The kids don't like it. So how do we coach around these things? With grace. But like the personal trainer, we're not going to get down there and do your push-ups. No, that is not the way. How do we begin to actually start to shift things? We have to first disrupt ourselves. I want you to think about, and I'm going to give you, I think we'll have a few minutes, so I'm going to just give you a little opportunity to kind of turn and talk to somebody, and then maybe we'll have a few minutes for questions. But I want you to think about the body of knowledge that I just shared with you. Where's your growing edge? What would you say, oh, I've got to learn that to get that knowledge and skill set and those materials in my coaching toolkit? Because listen, you ain't going to Google it and someone's going to give you a packet. And this is what we do. You know, heaven forbid, teachers are going to teachers pay teachers. You know what I'm talking about. We can't get an amen on that. That's when we won't be coaches going to coaches pay coaches. You know what I'm talking about. And this is what I want to be able to do. It's like there is a powerful framework that Jim Knight and his colleagues offer, but there's also a strategic body of knowledge that you need. And just repeating the words equity is not the same as helping teachers become the personal trainer of students' cognitive capacity. We have to actually think about disrupting those systems. And so I'm going to go back to this one because I think the question is not just rolling up on our leadership. Too often that's what we think it is. It's confrontational. No, what it really is the opportunity to rethink, reinvent, and reposition. That's what disruption means. And how do we notice and name and be able to tell the truth and help people see it and have their own catalytic moment like, oh snap. The brain needs gentle disequilibrium in order to let new thinking in. How do you offer that new thinking? What will you do? If all we do is traffic in strategies, we're disrupting nothing. We're just shifting things around. Michelle Alexander, the author of The New Jim Crow, she talks about that first chapter of that book. If you have the opportunity to read it, it's worth its weight in gold. The rebirth of caste. And what she says is every time people really start to press the system for change, we don't. We don't change, we shift. And we just keep doing the same things under a new guise to make us feel like we are. And this is what's happening. We talk about deeper learning and acceleration, high expectation, access to grade level materials. But we're still over scaffolding. We're still rationing the kind of learning that needs to happen. So I want to end with this idea. I love Atul Gawande's work. He's a surgeon and the author of the Checklist Manifesto. I don't know how he does it all, but he does, and he leaves us with really wise words. Better is possible does not take genius. It takes diligence. It takes moral clarity. And above all, it takes a willingness to try. This is where we are. How are we creating spaces for that iteration? for that prototyping? Where is collaborative inquiry in the work that we're doing? How are we normalizing videotape so that we can watch it? Not just videotape of us teaching, but of students talking. Are they leveling up? Can we see growth every 3 weeks so we can know we're moving them from dependent learning to cognitively independent? This is our work. I want to end there, but we've got about 15 minutes. I want to invite you just at your table. Let's take about 3 or 4